In the world of the future, running is considered an illegal activity for the wealthy. This is because for those who are truly affluent, time is the least scarce resource. Welcome to the AOVO Clips channel. A young man ventured into the affluent district for the first time and nearly exposed his identity as someone less fortunate. In response, he quickly slowed his pace and leisurely entered a luxurious hotel. The man approached a waiter and promptly reserved 10 presidential suites. What's peculiar is that the waiter did not accept any physical currency. Instead, using a device in hand, the waiter scanned the man's arm, completing the transaction. It turns out that in this future world, humans have phased out the traditional use of money for consumption. Time has taken its place. Each person's forearm bears a unique timer that begins accompanying them from birth throughout their entire life. Time now serves as both life and currency. Whether it's buying a house or a car, payment is conducted in units of time. When the timer on one's forearm reaches 0, death awaits. Conversely, a full timer grants eternal life. Mark was initially a penniless individual living on the edge. With a life expectancy of less than 24 hours, he was compelled to work tirelessly day and night at a morally questionable factory in order to survive. However, when payday finally arrived, Mark realized that his entire day of labor translated to earning less than 4 minutes of additional life. Fueled by anger, he sought out the factory owner to voice his grievances. Yet, in a society where the poor are exploited, no one sided with Mark. Consequently, he had no choice but to visit a bar, where he asked a close friend to return the hour he had borrowed the previous week. Unfortunately, not only did his friend refuse to return the hour, but also pointed to a man sitting nearby, lost in drunkenness. The surprising individual had well over 100 years displayed on their forearm, a true representation of great wealth. Mark was well aware that in this mingled crowd of the bar, snatching a day's worth of time was an all too common reason for murder. Hence, he approached the affluent person, urging them that the place wasn't safe and they should leave. However, to Mark's surprise, the wealthy individual seemed completely indifferent. At that very moment, an uninvited group burst into the bar, notorious time thieves. If these intruders found out that the affluent person possessed more than a century's worth of time, it would certainly invite lethal danger. Without hesitating, Mark took a risk, grabbed the wealthy person's hand, and sprinted away. Fortunately, Mark was intimately familiar with the surroundings, and before long, he led the wealthy individual to an abandoned factory where they could hide. As they conversed, the two learned that the wealthy individual had grown weary of the privileged class that used their abundant time to oppress the lives of the less fortunate. He was contemplating ending his life through suicide, hence his deliberate visit to the bar of the underprivileged, flaunting his excessive time. Given that Mark had fearlessly saved him, the wealthy person inquired, if he were to receive 100 years of time, what would he do with it?
If I had all that time, sure as hell would waste it.
Upon receiving Mark's response, the wealthy individual looked at his wrist with a meaningful expression. The next day, when Mark woke up from his slumber, he suddenly noticed that his wrist inexplicably bore an additional 100 years of time. Moreover, the wealthy person from the previous night had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a note on the glass. The note conveyed the wealthy person's desire for Mark to live well in his place. Following the direction of the note on the glass, Mark spotted the wealthy individual sitting on a bridge. He initially intended to approach and intervene, but it was too late. The timer on the wealthy person's arm hit 0, and he leaped into the river. This way, Mark assumed the wealthy person's time and continued to live.
By the way, if you enjoy our movie recaps, we're currently hosting a giveaway for our audience. We're excited to announce that a brand new scooter awaits one lucky subscriber. Don't miss out. Subscribe and follow us to stay tuned for more updates.
The security cameras recorded the entire incident. With this newfound abundance of time, Mark swore to make the wealthy pay a painful price. The most direct approach was to take away the time on their forearms. Disguising himself, Mark made his way to the grandest time gambling establishment of the affluent. He aimed to make them lose spectacularly, but fate had other plans. As soon as Mark sat at a gambling table, he found himself facing the head of the time bank, a man with trillions of years to his name. The game commenced swiftly, and to Mark's surprise, the time bank head wagered 100 years at the start. To avoid being overwhelmed, Mark was compelled to stake his entire newly acquired time at 100 years, leaving himself with a mere 10-second opening. Losing would result in instant death. Luck was on his side, as his hand turned out to be the strongest on the table, securing his victory. Despite gaining 1,000 years of time from the win, Mark opted not to continue and left the gambling establishment. This decision garnered the respect of the time bank head. As a result, the time bank head introduced his daughter Lisa to Mark. Their acquaintance gradually blossomed into affection as they spent time together. Just as Mark was about to leave after attending the banquet, the Time police unexpectedly paid him a visit. They had identified his presence in the video recording of the wealthy individual's suicide by jumping into the river. Coupled with his sudden acquisition of 100 years of time, the police chief grew suspicious that Mark might be involved. They detained him at the police station despite Mark's incessant explanations that the time had been voluntarily given by the wealthy person. But the police chief remained unconvinced and stated that unless they could hear from the dead, his story wouldn't be believed. Recognizing the dire situation, Mark suddenly stood up and incapacitated the two guards beside him, seizing their handguns. He quickly made his way to the first floor of the building, taking Time Bank head's daughter Lisa hostage. To evade the pursuing guards, he commandeered a car and left the affluent district. Though the police chief chased them, he couldn't take action due to Lisa's presence. Ultimately, the police chief could only watch helplessly as Mark and Lisa disappeared into the bustling city. The next day, Mark continued driving with Lisa, evading the police's pursuit. However, while looking up at a surveillance camera on a pillar, they inadvertently triggered a trap set by the Time thieves. The car spun out of control and careened toward the edge of a cliff. The impact left both of them unconscious. Subsequently, the Time thieves arrived, stole the time from their forearms, and left. When Lisa regained consciousness, she found they had less than 30 minutes of time left. Without prompt replenishment, their lives would end shortly. Mark conceived the idea of using Lisa to blackmail the Time Bank head. He demanded the return of 100 years of time in exchange for her release, threatening to tear up their time tickets otherwise. However, the Time Bank head didn't comply. He argued that allowing time to flow into the hands of the poor would endanger the wealthy. In the midst of conflicting interests and family bonds, he chose the former. After learning of her father's heartlessness, Lisa decided to seek revenge alongside Mark. They commandeered a truck and forcefully rammed into a bank's warehouse. They plundered the stored time and, as they left, Lisa declared to the impoverished bystanders that it was her father's bank, urging them to seize the time inside. By the time the police chief arrived at the scene, the bank had been thoroughly looted. Meanwhile, after Mark and Lisa seized the bank's stored time, they didn't keep it for themselves. Instead, they distributed it all to the people in the impoverished district. After a relentless pursuit lasting 3 days and nights, the police chief finally cornered Lisa and Mark. He attempted to convince them to surrender, but Mark subtly indicated his remaining time on his forearm. He had anticipated the police chief's limited time supply. As the countdown reached 3 seconds, the police chief collapsed, taking his last breath. Now, with less than a minute of time left for Mark and Lisa, Mark noticed a police car by the roadside equipped with a time replenishment device. He raced towards the car, fighting against time. With only 3 seconds left, he successfully replenished their time. The two clung to each other in a tight embrace. The film concludes with Lisa's betrayal of her father, joining Mark's cause. They become time thieves, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. In their efforts to redistribute wealth, poverty ceases to exist.